SLU International Business Now, Conversations That Matter is a podcast developed by the Boeing Institute of International Business in St. Louis University's Chaffetz School of Business. Special thanks to founder Dr. Sung Kim for his grant to support the launch of this podcast.
Welcome to our listeners from the St. Louis University Boeing Institute of International Business. I'm your host, Chris Carril, hosting the latest episode of Conversations That Matter. I'm joined today by Dr. Jeff Heaton, Vice President of AI Innovation at Reinsurance Group of America, and Matt Blakely, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability at Reinsurance Group of America. It's a pleasure to have both of you with me today to speak about RGA's sustainability efforts and its use of AI within that topic. I'd like to start our conversation today having each of you sort of introduce yourself, your role here at RGA, and any sort of story about your journey, how you ended up here where you are. Dr. Heaton?
Sure. So I've been at RGA for 23 years. I started in global technology. My background, my PhD is in computer science. Worked there probably half my career and then moved over to analytics. I've just always been interested in teaching programs to learn things from data. As a software engineer, I taught it very directly by just giving it cookie cutter kind of instructions. As an AI, I help it to learn and to learn from data.
Super. Thank you. Matt?
And I've been with RGA for about 5 years now. Moved to St. Louis from Chicago. Have been in the corporate social responsibility, sustainability, or inclusion space for about almost 30 years, if I could date myself that way.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that I really enjoy about my job, and especially the job here at RGA, is I get to find the connections between the company and society and community, and how we are impacted by society and how we may also impact it for the better as well.
Well, that's a great intro. So thank you for leading me in on that. Why don't we start with, why is sustainability important both to RGA and to the communities in which you operate?
Sure. I'll start with that, and then Jeff, you can jump in if you'd like. That's a great question, Chris. I'll say three things on that. First, we are a company that believes in access to financial protection for all. So that's our purpose, and you can't do that without looking at the effect you may have on communities and on society, right? So by being a company that recognizes our role as beyond just financial performance, but also making sure that we are a good corporate citizen and that we're being environmentally responsible is core to our purpose. The second thing I would say is that we're a long-term business. The relationships that we have with clients can go many years, sometimes even many decades. And as leaders in risk and understanding risk and turning risk into opportunities, we need to look at not only what are financial risks, but what are the risks from a changing climate, or what are the risks or opportunities that present as society changes, either through health innovations, changing demographics, or artificial intelligence, like what we're talking about here today. And then the third thing is, I would say it's important for us because it's important to many of our stakeholders. We get questions from our client companies. We get questions from investors about what is our profile, how do we interact, how do we support society and environment, because they want to work with or invest in companies that they can be proud to have in their value chain. They want business partners that they feel good working with. And then I would say, too, our internal stakeholders, our employees. It's very important to our employees. They find inspiration and pride in the fact that, we support their activity in the community, their volunteerism. They can go home at the end of the day and know that their company cares about them, cares about the environment, and cares about the communities. And it's not only our current employees, but our future employees. When we look at new talent coming into the marketplace, they really are interested in what is a company's CSR profile.
I think that's really important, because I think people hear this word sustainability and they say to themselves, well, it's about the environment. but it's really not. There's a lot of stakeholders, right? I learned this in my MBA program, that there's shareholders, there's employees, there's the communities that, everybody wants to work together. My next question is, what are some of these, we talk about the requirements. What are some of the international requirements that you face around sustainability? What are people asking you about?
Yeah, great question. So internationally, there are a number of different, regulations or expectations that are out there. And as a global company, we need to make sure that we're prepared for those and that we're answering those. We can get down into the very specifics of certain laws, but if I'm going to draw a big brushstroke now for where we're at now, typically you see, Europe and Canada being much more interested in transparency around environmental sustainability, and how a company is looking at the risks that changing climate may present to them, and then how they can affect or mitigate the changes of climate. You've got in the United States, regulation seems to depend on, who controls Congress or the White House at the time, but you've got differences within different states. Yeah. Different states are proposing different regulations and have different requirements for companies to operate there. And then in the Asia Pacific countries, you've got a whole wide variety of regulations based on a country's government or regulatory style or history. The populations there are just so varied that you really need to build structures within your company that allow you to make sure that you're staying in compliance with all of those things and being able to tell a unified story as well.
Yeah, and that is really important, and that there's so many different laws. There's so many different things. People may think, well, RGA is not a manufacturer, right? You don't have these big plants that could do, pollute things. But the fact is every company, right, is looking at sustainability, or at least most public companies, because all the stakeholders. So it is interesting how many rules you have to look at and deal with and contend with, and then they change. So that is certainly a challenge. So if you look at sustainability, what is the scope? Meaning, how far down does it go? Do you find yourself working with finance people, with operations people? What is the scope of your sustainability efforts? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, it makes sense. And how do we define it, right? Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. So we define sustainability in a broad sense, right? Yeah. In the widest terms possible, because as I mentioned before, we're a company with a lot of expertise in understanding risk. And we're a company that's very much involved in the health and longevity of societies, right? So when economies succeed, when people are living healthier, longer lives, when innovations are brought to the marketplace, those are all important to us. So we write sustainability quite broadly, right? That's not just environmental sustainability, like how are we reducing our emissions, and those sorts of things. It's not only how are we being a more inclusive company, right? We're a global company with folks with a variety of different backgrounds. How are we building that inclusive, collaborative culture? It is how we govern ourselves. And this is particularly true for things like artificial intelligence and our data analytics. Yeah. Are we making sure that we're looking out for risks and governing ourselves and preparing ourselves for the ethical challenges that may pop up, and having those as well. So we define it pretty broadly.
Sure. And you brought up data analytics. So it's time to talk to Jeff. Artificial intelligence, it's in the news. We hear it all over the place. How is RGA using artificial intelligence in its sustainability efforts?
So we've used AI for quite some time. I mean, actuaries are some of your original data scientists. We use it for some of our basic climate models, things like that, just looking at how it's going to affect our exposure to risk really long term. And it's a very multifaceted thing. It's going to get warmer. Well, on some hand, that the coldest parts of the year are when people die the most. So in that regard, it's a net negative, but it's a very multifaceted phenomenon that we certainly need to look at.
Got it. Now, I've heard this term GPU used, and for all of our listeners, many of whom are students, explain what a GPU is and how it's part of the sustainability effort.
Absolutely. It's a graphics processing unit. They were originally created for video games. And the early computers didn't have them. The graphics tech was built all into the computer, but they've become quite a bit bigger. You'd hold one in both hands, and they're fairly heavy. They can consume 300, 600 or more watts of power. So I have a couple of high-end ones at home. I'm also a YouTuber, so I work with NVIDIA. They typically give me the highest-end ones, and my office used to be cold. You put two of those in there, they're like hair dryers. They're just blowing out constant. You don't need a space heater. So these are expensive devices. They run $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 depending on the level that you're buying. They have the carbon footprint when they're first made. They have the carbon footprint as they're being used. And there's a lot of facets that we need to look at RGA. How many can we keep going 24/7? Most of ours we actually buy in the cloud through providers like Amazon, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure. That if you think a car loses a lot of value when you drive it off the showroom floor, that's nothing compared to a GPU.
Sure.
So you want to make sure you use these, that they're ran at capacity, and we'd rather let the cloud providers figure that out for us, and they can get the air conditioning and all the things that are needed to minimize the hardware level of the carbon footprint.
Yeah, when it comes to computer stuff, my background in finance, we depreciate them fast, we replace them a lot. So I know what you're talking, and into the cloud to try to mitigate some of these on-premise costs. And I guess that's a nice segue into the next part of this topic, and that is, companies are spending a lot of money on sustainability efforts. I mean, you mentioned how many people you touch. Jeff, you mentioned certainly technology. What is RGA doing to try to mitigate some of those costs?
Well, I think our approach to it is that, sustainability needs to be built into everything that we do, right? And again, I mean sustainability in terms of, long-term growth success for the company and society. And you may, think to yourself at first, oh my gosh, if it's built in everywhere, it's going to cost so much, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But what we find is happening is that because there are so many people in the company that care about this, and because many of those departments or spaces have tools already built into what they're doing, you kind of plug into those tools or make it a part of how that tool or how that system looks at sustainability. So you're not layering on a whole other thing. You're actually just building it into what already exists. So in that regard, it's less costly than you may think. It helps at RGA too, having a lot of people who care about these issues and are very smart and very adaptable, so they can build it into their processes. But if you look at it from a operational efficiency standpoint, it's very helpful. Like, for example, one of the things that we need to do for a lot of our reporting, or even to make our climate goal of being net zero in scope 1 or scope 2 by the end of 2026 is we brought a tool in place to help us calculate our emissions and record our emissions from our offices and from where we buy power. It's a global tool that all of our different offices can use. So let's say, for example, we've got, like in Australia, we're going to need to report what are our emissions from our Australian offices. They can plug into that tool and get the information that they need rather than have to build one of their own ones, right? So we really look at, what is efficiency and how can we build on the expertise already in the company.
Wow, It's fascinating. I mean, the efforts that have gone into sustainability here at RGA. We've kind of reached the end of our time, and I always like to ask our guests if you have any final thoughts. Where do you think sustainability is going? Where do you think the biggest challenges are in sustainability? Jeff?
I'll say, speaking from the technical side, I think it's learning to do more with less. So there's been a lot of regulation along with how these GPUs can be sold to various countries, and that has fostered an unintended benefit of that is it has fostered some really innovative techniques on the technology level to do more with just a couple of GPUs. So that immediately takes your carbon footprint down. Just in electric costs at the wholesale level, to train GPT-3 was about $80,000.
Oh, wow.
It's
wow.
1,300 or so megawatt hours. So the power needs of these are not small.
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, and I would say I think we're in a time of very interesting change with regards to sustainability and corporate responsibility. It is appearing in regulations as you point out. We've got stakeholders, whether they be investors or clients, that have various expectations. There are new technologies like artificial intelligence that are coming online that are bringing new opportunities and demands. And I think what we're seeing is regulators and investors and folks adapting to those changes or trying to get in front of them. And so, you get this sort of uneven landscape, if you will, and definitions of what it is. And I think, companies, many companies like ourselves, many jurisdictions, technology providers and innovators, we'll find our way through it. The thing that makes me happy is that employees, companies, investors, innovators, all know that this is important.
Yeah.
That society, that companies have a bigger impact on society than just their bottom line.
And it's not going away.
And it's not going away.
It's not going away.
It's not going away. It's how we're going to get there, and at what level is it going to be regulatorily required, and at what point is it going to be a competitive advantage. That's what we'll need to work out.
Great. Well, thank you both for joining me here and providing some insight to our listeners, not only about sustainability, but also the use of AI within sustainability. I'm your host, Chris Carril, bringing you the latest episode of Conversations That Matter. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the SLU International Business Now Conversations That Matter podcast. We invite you to subscribe to this podcast series so you don't miss any future episodes. To learn more about the Executive Master of International Business program, please visit biib.slu.edu. Again, that's biib.slu.edu.